Hello, everyone. It's good to see you today, and I'm glad that everyone has tuned in to EPN's continuing webinar series. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people joined these, and today we're excited to welcome this panel to talk about the Compass Rose Society of the Anglican Communion. I'm Michael Sullivan, and I am the immediate past president of EPN and also the president of Canoga Conference Center. But most importantly, Canoga is a part of the Compass Rose Society and has been since it was established. And it has been my joy to get to know more and more of what the communion is doing around the world and how we can participate in it. So I'm delighted to welcome this panel and to introduce the panel, the Reverend James Stombaugh of Church of the Holy Apostles in Wynnewood, Pennsylvania. So get us going, James.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. It's wonderful to be in this digital space with you and with these excellent panelists as we discuss what the Compass Rose is and a little bit about what we're doing, what the impact of the Compass Rose Society is around the world. So this afternoon, we have the Reverend Canon Jan Naylor Cope, who is the first vice president of the Compass Rose Society. She is also the provost of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and she will be speaking, followed by Miss Janet Miles, who is the Director of Public Engagement for the Anglican Communion Office, which is the official secretariat of the Anglican Communion. And then finally, the Right Reverend Daniel G.P. Gutierrez, the 16th Bishop of the Diocese of Pennsylvania and the President of the Compass Rose Society. So, Jan.
I think I kicked this off, maybe because I'm the one who's been around the longest, but it's a joy to be with you today and to share one of my great passions, which is the Compass Rose Society. And just a little bit of background, the society was created in 1994. You can go back 30 years. Then Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, made a trip to war-ravaged Sudan. And the situation there was so horrific that when he came back to London, he wanted to tell the story, which had not been told. But he really didn't have the tools and the resources to do it. And the needs were so incredibly urgent. And it was out of that crisis, frankly, that the idea came that could a group of people from around the Anglican Communion come together, help raise resources so that the Archbishop's office could tell the story. And that's really how it began 30 years ago with trips to parishes in the US and in Canada and the UK, and a group of people committed to the relationships that we have with one another came together to form the Compass Rose Society. And it is our privilege as members to raise money to help support the urgent work of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Anglican Communion Office. My own involvement came in about 1999, I think. One of the privileges of membership, in addition to coming together for our annual meeting, which is normally in London or Canterbury, and hearing directly from the Archbishop, is the opportunity to go on mission trips. And these are not vacations, they're pilgrimages, where we see what our fellow Anglican brother and sisters are doing in their own context. And it was in that vein that I went in 1999 on my first Holy Land pilgrimage. I'd been to the Holy Land before, but not in the way that I was able to do it through the Compass Rose Society. On that trip, if you can imagine, we saw not only what was happening in Israel, but we went to Gaza when Yasser Arafat was the head of the PLO. That trip and what we saw and what we witnessed today is frankly unimaginable as we think about what's going on in the Holy Land. Other mission trips to South Africa, going to the townships, going to the cell where Nelson Mandela was held. These are life-changing opportunities for us to have a better understanding of what our brothers and sisters in Christ are doing in terms of ministry, often in incredible hardship. And that first trip of mine, in 1999, I was a lay leader at my then home church, St. John's Lafayette Square, which was one of the original members of the Compass Rose Society. And I was so moved by what we encountered that I came back from that trip and asked my husband if we could become members. And we did. And I can assure you in the 25 years of my membership that it's truly been life-changing. And I think if you talk to any member of the society, they all have their own stories that follow somewhat of this line. Over the 30 years that the Compass Rose Society has been in existence, we've raised $12 million for the Anglican Communion Office and the Archbishop of Canterbury's work, and we've done so proudly. And it's not just supporting that office. We also support, typically a project will come up when we make these trips. And for example, when we were in South Africa, I think many years ago, it's before technology as we have it today, but they really didn't have the resources to have a lot of seminaries and access to books. And so part of what we funded as a society were e-readers so that every clergy person in training would readily have access to a full theological library just by having, in essence, a Kindle. It's those sorts of things that, frankly, don't take a whole lot of money, but they're out of the reach of so many places around the communion. And that's what we've been proud to help support, whether it's the Princess Bosma Center in Jerusalem, the Green Anglican Initiative, Wendy School in Ghana, the Bishop Acton Eye Clinic. And for this last Lambeth conference, we were proud to raise special funds so that bishops from poorer dioceses and provinces around the communion were able to participate. So it would be a more fulsome coming together of that important body. And so I just wanted to give you a quick sense of the society, our history, and how much it means to us personally to be connected and building these relationships all across the globe. And I think I'll leave it there, James. And you're muted, in the famous words of every Zoom call we've ever been on.
Well, I wouldn't want to break that tradition. Thank you very much, Jan. And I will say that at the end, we will have some time for questions. I see in the chat lots of people joining, and so thank you for posting where you're from and your connection with the Compass Rose. Now I'd like to invite Janet Miles to speak. As I said, she is the Director of Public Engagement for the Anglican Communion Office. She works very closely with Bishop Anthony Pogo, who is the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion. And Janet, please tell us how the Compass Rose Society, as we support the work of the Anglican Communion Office, tell us what that work is and what the impact is.
Thank you, Reverend James, and hello, everybody. Wonderful to be with you today. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this webinar. I'd love to just give you a little bit of a summary of what the Anglican Communion Office does. Obviously, we really value and appreciate the support that is given by the Compass Rose Society. The Society makes a massive difference to the work that we do. And we see very much as partners and friends in our shared mission as Christians, sharing the good news of the Christian faith in the world today. So we want to thank you and honour you for all that you bring. I'll just try and give a real whistle-stop tour of what the Anglican Communion Office does and why the support of the Compass Rose means so much to us. We are, as you've mentioned already, we are the official secretariat to the Anglican Communion. So obviously worldwide, the Anglican Communion is in over 165 countries. There are 42 provinces or regions of the Anglican Communion. And our office, we're based in London in the United Kingdom, but we have a very international view, and that is supporting Anglicans around the world as they represent and share the good news in their contexts. So we see ourselves as the Anglican Communion Office as a team where we're not like the head office of the Anglican Communion, far from it. Instead, we're there to be a team that is serving, supporting, and working to enable and strengthen the life of the Anglican Communion. So in many respects, we see ourselves as almost connecting the dots around the world and bringing different Anglican voices together, different experiences and expressions of mission and ministry in all of their contexts around the world, learning from one another and seeking to share resources with one another. We do that in a number of different ways. One of the ways we've already you've heard that we have Bishop Anthony Pogo, who is the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion. So one of the ways we seek to enable and support communion life is that Bishop Anthony himself does quite a lot of visits to different parts of the Anglican Communion. And as Jan has already been saying, the value of meeting Anglicans in their local context, meeting many of the provinces and the dioceses of the Anglican Communion is a real opportunity for us, the Communion Secretariat, to learn the different opportunities and challenges that are going on. So Bishop Anthony is able to do a lot of those kind of support visits because of some of the support that you give to the office. Another way in which we seek to enable and strengthen communion life is through supporting what we call the instruments of the Anglican Communion, which is perhaps for some people very common language, for others maybe it's a bit geeky and niche. So just to kind of explain what we mean by the instruments of the Anglican Communion, these instruments are all designed to support conversation and to build unity within the Anglican Communion. So they are things like the Lambeth Conference is one of the instruments that gathers all the bishops from all around the world every 10 years. And that the last one happened in 2022. So our office supported and facilitated, enabled that whole meeting to happen and to take place. Another instrument is the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. And so we do a lot of work to liaise with the Archbishop and his team in terms of how he supports and serves the Anglican Communion. We have the Anglican Consultative Council, which brings together bishops, clergy and laity for discussions on Anglican Communion affairs. And then we have the primates meeting, and that gathers Anglican archbishops from all around the world for meetings too. So they are what we call the instruments, and the job of our office is to enable and support those meetings to take place. And I don't have time to go into all of the ins and outs of that, but as you can imagine, what we seek to do is to really listen and discern the different priorities that are emerging in some of those conversations and in some of those important spaces for dialogue, but then also continuing to champion and represent some of the outcomes of those discussions and sharing them more widely around the communion. There are other ways in which we serve and support the life of the Anglican Communion. One of them is that we support a lot of commissions and networks. So we have a number of different Anglican groups around the world that gather together to share areas of ministry or mission focus. For example, we have a recent commission that was established in 2022 called the Anglican Communion Science Commission. And they're involved in connecting people of faith and collaborating with the science community in response to problems facing people and planet. So that's just one of our many commissions. And we, as the Anglican Communion Office, seek to represent and amplify some of the conversations they are having. Another area is we also do a lot of work on ecumenical and inter-Anglican dialogue, and our Unity, Faith and Order team work together to share lots of different discussions and bringing together different denominations to talk about many issues that impact the church and the world today. And then another area is that we have the Anglican Communion Office also has a UN team, and they work to represent Anglicans at the UN. And they often seek to represent how different Anglican churches around the world are experiencing different issues, for example, environmental crises. We are able, through our UN team, to represent the voice of Anglicans into lots of the discussions and dialogue that happen at a UN level. But similarly, we're able to discern some of the things that are happening at a UN level and work with churches to collaborate on joint responses as globally we try to work together to provide solutions to some of the world's biggest issues. So that's just a few examples in the ways that which we as an Anglican Communion seek to be a secretariat. We also do a lot of training and resourcing and bringing bishops together. Since the Lambeth Conference, our Episcopal ministry team has been gathering bishops together online to keep talking about some of the outcomes and decisions that were made at the Lambeth Conference and taking them forward and carrying them into the life of our churches and our communities around the world. So that's just a very quick summary, and there's so much more I could say. But I guess what I wanted to do is just to kind of give you 2 or 3 examples of ways in which I'm really encouraged by working for the Anglican Communion, but also how the support of the Compass Rose really helps us. So one example is recently, I mentioned how the Secretary General, Bishop Anthony, does a number of mission visits around the world and solidarity visits. Sometimes different members of the team accompany him on those. Obviously, I work in public engagement and communications, so I attended one recently during our summer, and we visited the province of South Sudan. And Bishop Anthony himself is Sudanese, and in his early ministry used to be the bishop of a diocese called Kaji-Keji. And Kaji-Keji is in the south of South Sudan, very near the border of Uganda. And as you can imagine, South Sudan has been incredibly impacted by the devastation and trauma of civil war. And we went, Bishop Anthony was there to go and visit and meet the community there and encourage them in all that they are doing. And we spent time visiting the current bishop who used to be, the role used to be done by Bishop Anthony many, many years ago. And to cut a long story short, essentially, we had the privilege of being hosted by the diocese, who took a long time to take us around the local community, seeing firsthand how the community has been impacted by the destruction of civil war, but also seeing a very hopeful church in the midst of all of those things that are rebuilding their community and trying to encourage people to feel safe again in that place. Many, many people have been displaced or are refugees because of the civil war in South Sudan. And one of the teams that we met when we were on this visit to Kaji-Keji were a radio team that the diocese run, and they are basically working in a very small room, not much air, not much ventilation, but they broadcast from about 5:30 in the morning till 11 p.m. at night, trying to share Christian content, messages of hope, prayers, and to encourage people that have been displaced from their community. But equally, it's becoming a really important news source as well for the health teams in the area, for local businesses who are trying to reach out to those that are still living in refugee camps. And the challenge that we saw when we went on that visit is that that haven't got a radio mast that's tall enough yet to reach as far as they need to reach all of the people in sort of refugee camps that are currently in North Uganda. So it was a really important insight for us as the Anglican Communion Office to see the very real struggles that people are having in some of their communities, and yet the commitment of the local church to really make a difference. And the bishop there, Bishop James Lule, said to me that when the church returns to areas like this that have been so traumatized and seen such a displacement of people, when they see their bishop returning, then people can feel trust and safety that they may also be able to do the same. And it was really powerful for us to be able to see that. And I think as a communion office, what we now seek to do is we try to represent stories like that, situations like that. We know we can't, as an office, support every single need like that, but what we can do is we can have a voice and we can help share the situation and the needs of those people. And so the funding that you provide as the Compass Rose is really just helps us to be able to be there, to be listening in, to be able to tune into some of the key priorities that people have and to represent that to a more global audience. There's probably loads more I could say, but I don't want to take too much more time. But obviously, if there are questions later, I can respond.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your really important work all around the world. So now I'd like to invite Bishop Daniel Gutierrez to speak. As I said, Bishop Daniel is the president of the Compass Rose Society. He is also the 16th Bishop of Pennsylvania. Before that, he had a career in business and in government. And welcome, Bishop Daniel.
Thank you, James. And I just want to thank all of you for spending part of this afternoon. And Janet, I know it's evening. What is it? 9 o'clock in London, 9 or 10. And Jan has just always been a fellow sojourner. This is, aside from my calling to serve the people, the beautiful people of Pennsylvania, I consider this my most important ministry. I used to say it is the church's hidden gem, but I've really seen the love, the faith, and the hope reflected by the members of the Compass Rose Society. Because when it gets down to it, it really is, I always remember that Jesus calls us to be with the poor, not save the poor or help the poor, but to be with the poor. And when I say poverty, people always get caught up on the economic component. But we know all of us have been wounded, and everyone has some sort of poverty, whether it's relational poverty, whether it's physical poverty, whether it's mental, you name it. And the Compass Rose, we endeavor to enter into the pain and suffering and marginalization and despair and needs of those siblings throughout the entire communion. I believe that when Jesus said his prayer that we all may be one, that he didn't mean the same people in the same denomination or the one country or anything else. He meant all of us. And we have the ability to empower God's work in the world through little steps. And we go to the places, and it's just not a mission trip. It is really creating lifelong partnerships where we actually just don't write a check, go visit, write a check, and come back home. No, there is heart-to-heart, life-giving relationships that are formed, and that just makes us stronger. And I won't take long because I want to hear from you. But we go to Africa. We were in Tanzania last year. We go to Latin America. I was just with the Archbishop of Canterbury in El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Panama. And to look in the eyes of our siblings who are displaced and making a perilous and deadly journey through the Darien Gap, just trying to find life, and them knowing that they're not alone because the church, the body of Christ, is with them. I was in Mexico along the border with women who have been trafficked, and you see the despair and just the pain, but to walk with them in hope and to let them know they're not alone. This is what it comes down to. I really want, in my 6 years as president, to say this isn't an organization. It's not an administrative entity. It's not something that we just do as church. It's who we are as church. It is what we're called to be in the world as followers of the Prince of Peace, our beloved Savior, Jesus Christ. We are going to New Zealand in February to be with my good friend Archbishop Don, because we know what the church has done to the Maori, and so how can we walk together with one another and say, you're not alone, we got your back, and you got our back, and we want to learn from you, and whatever we can share with you, please, let's do this together. And so I see in all our churches, there has been very few churches in my diocese or through the Church Universal where people are called to something better, a goodness, a kindness, compassion. It's inherent part of our divine image that God gave us. And this is the way that we go out and step out in the world. We've made some large changes in the Compass Rose Society itself. There are some nice things that people like. We meet every year in London, and we have dinner with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and we say evening prayer, and where the Book of Common Prayer is written. But there's more to that. It's the fellowship. It's the knowing that we are looking out in the world with the same set of eyes to do God's work in this world. So if you've been thinking about it, please consider us. Some of the changes that I've really pushed hard, and I'm thankful for the board of Compass Rose, is that we can't be a insular entity. So we have opened up membership to seminarians, people from other parts of the communion, rather than just members, that we can't have full and active discussion unless we have every voice seated at the table. We're going to raise money for scholarships. I want the diversity of God's kingdom to be reflected in the Compass Rose Society in its leadership. And that's what we're doing. So I ask you to prayerfully consider, and there's a lot of churches who are members and they don't know that they're members. The former rector paid the fee years ago, and it's laid fallow for years. I want you to look, and I invite you. Let's lock arms together and let's be a force for good in this world that often doesn't see kindness, compassion, and good. And this is one of those shining lights upon the hill, the Compass Rose Society, that does so. So I'd like to open up for questions. Bishops always talk, and I get tired of hearing bishops talk, and I get tired of hearing me talk. So I want to hear from you. Please, if there's any questions. And I see Pam is on the line. She was a wonderful board member. So there's friends connected, but let's grow this organization. And we've expanded over the last 5-6 years. I think this year at our annual general meeting is one of the largest in close to a decade. So the word's getting out. This hidden gem is no longer being hidden anymore.
Thank you so much, Bishop. Yeah, so participants, we'd like to hear from you. If you'd like to put a question in the chat bar, I can relay that to the panelists. So I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the student membership? A little bit more about that, what that looks like, what's the cost?
Is that for me?
Yeah, or Jan.
Jen, do you remember?
I always defer to a bishop.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. You know, James, to tell you the truth, I can't remember what the actual cost was. I just wanted to make sure I wanted to do it for free. But I want to tell you to mention, and maybe James can um, um, talk about it. It is so important that my director of communication serves as the director of communication for the Compass Rose Society. We pay the Reverend Stambaugh out of his, to do the administrative duties and coordinate things. My finance director is one of the finance people for the Compass Rose Society. That, along with the Diocese of Texas, their finance staff in Houston. We have large participation in, it's made up of three basic stools of different organizations, the diocese in Hong Kong, the church in Canada, and of course the Episcopal Church. But we have a participation in Texas, the East Coast. We're trying to get, chapters again started in churches in Florida, the West Coast of Canada, in the Midwest. There's really no one who we need voices from throughout the Episcopal Church. And I think I'm inviting you to help me be those trailblazers. And one of the things, was it $500, James, or $1,000? Do you remember?
For student memberships,
Yeah.
it's $200.
$200. I knew it was in the hundreds, but I think it's important because we've seen throughout, and this is what pushed me is that the young adults, and whether they're teenagers or in college or in their late 20s or 30s, their giving to social outreach has moved up, but their attendance at church has declined. And I often say that we have to hit that access point but I think sometimes that people see that we say what we do, but do we do what we say as a church? And I think a lot of our churches do, and I want the Compass Rose to do so. I saw a question on there.
Yeah, so Pam asks, can you say more about chapter memberships?
Right now, an individual church, the initial fee, if I'm correct, is $10,000 one time. You just pay it one time, and then there's an annual giving. I think it's $2,500. That's why I have finance people. But it's that one time. But when I first was here 10 years ago, when I came, people had forgotten that the Diocese of Pennsylvania was a member. And so I was a member already when I was elected. And so I decided to go my first meeting, and that's when it changed before.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question. What is the primary focal point for 2025 with respect to strengthening interaction and communication within the Anglican Communion?
Well, what we do is, if you're on our list, we will determine our focal points, because we try to do it 3 years in advance, but we really drill down deeper at our annual general meeting. And we will be in London the 28th, 29th for the executive board meeting, and with the Archbishop and the Bishop Pogo, the 1st and 2nd. But I'd like to see some of the things that is going, right now, we have an immigration issue that's affecting, and it's just not in Latin America. It's throughout the world. But we know that is driven by poverty, that's driven by climate crisis. And, we're funding outreach throughout the world. And I want to emphasize that we work in partnership with the Anglican Communion Office. to determine the priorities, because we believe, as one of that assists the Anglican Communion Office, that Bishop Pogo and the people who work throughout the entire communion we rely on them to help direct us, instead of picking and choosing what is the most, we try to find the most pressing need at the time, and it may shift during that time. As you mentioned in Sudan, we see what is going on there. It has changed with the issue in the Holy Land, the pain that is occurring there. We sent to the Princess Basma Center over 200,000 last year for their immediate needs. So we plan, but also we respond to crises through the Anglican Communion Office.
Thank you.
Jen, you want to add in anything?
I was going to suggest, Janet, you may, in your role as communications for the ACO, talk a little bit to the question about the focus of communications in 2025 throughout the communion.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I could come at this from a couple of different angles. Firstly, I would say, just with my public engagement hat, looking at some of the ways in which the Anglican Communion Office communicates and has done historically, I'm fairly new into the role, and I'm coming in thinking, well, we want to really do a lot of work to update how the Anglican Communion Office communicates, and to provide a bit more up-to-date information. I think some of the things that we've been sharing over the last little while, some of our communication channels, our website is a little bit out of date. So there's some work to be done there for me to update some of those things, so that people can kind of get a bit more of an up-to-date sense of how we do our work. So that's work in the pipeline. So watch this space, but I'm hoping we'll be able to kind of share some of that in due course. But in terms of actual kind of program or priority areas, in terms of actual ministry and all of those kind of things, I think, in 2025, the ACO is going to be doing a lot of work to prepare for the next Anglican Consultative Council meeting, which will be happening in Ireland. And that will be a really important opportunity to gather Anglicans together from around the world to look at, the different mission areas that we share around the world. But I think the reality is the Anglican Communion Office, we do a lot of different types of work. Our portfolio is very broad. And I think that's where I come back to, we work to be an enabling team, because actually we're almost here providing support to a number of different important commissions and networks that are happening all the time. And so sometimes, we're trying to, through the communication work, we're trying to share information those networks are doing, because they're so in touch with the ministry field that they're working in, and so we have to focus our efforts there. Certainly next year we're going to be continuing on the phase 3 stage of the Lambeth Conference, which we're continuing to hold seasonal webinars on some of the Lambeth calls that were shared at the Lambeth Conference, looking at areas of peace and reconciliation. There's going to be more discussions happening later this year on human dignity and all of those kind of topics. So there's such a range of things that we're doing. And so, yeah, I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavor of some of the things coming up.
So I saw a question pop up there. There is no administrative overhead in the Compass Rose Society. The Diocese of Texas and Diocese of Pennsylvania pay for part of our not only direct contribution, but in-kind contribution. But if a small church cannot meet the yearly fee, I know I always get in trouble for saying this, or initial fee, what? That doesn't matter to me. I just want you to journey with us. I mean, if you can give me $500 and that goes directly to help our siblings throughout the world, sign up. Because I really, that is, we could give time, whatever. I don't care about that. I'd rather have the bodies and the voices. And then I always believe that, my favorite part, we always come up with these all new programs that sit on the shelf and no one can replicate it. We need a program for the church in Sachs too. You know, what did they say? They shared everything. Didn't say there was a cost and everything. They shared everything. They loved, they ate with one another, they were together. And what does it say at the end? And God added members to the membership daily. And that's why I look at something like the Compass Rose Society. I'm not very much of an institutional I have to sometimes or I'll get in trouble about following the rules. But I say, you know what? It's more about relationships internally that build relationships outside. So there's no external, we're all internal. So, you know, tell me, you want to go? Let's go and become a member. And let's not worry about money. Let's worry about feet, voices, and hearts together.
Thank you, Bishop. I see one more question, and maybe this goes to Jan. What sort of partnerships exist with other Anglican Communion offices, such as Episcopal Relief and Development or the Anglican Communion Office for Theological Education?
I'm happy for the question because we work hand in hand. And I know that we recently had the head of the Anglican Theological Schools as a speaker at our board meeting. And Robert Radke is a good friend of all of ours from ERD and very closely aligned with our work in ERD. And so know that on many issues, particularly humanitarian aid and assistance, we work hand in hand together. It's coordinated effort along with the Anglican Alliance, which Janet could speak more to, but we're all talking to one another, which is a good thing. And we're much the richer for it.
And as you know, since I've resigned most of my committees to devote to the Compass Rose Society, you know, if you need me to go anywhere, to talk to any church, I don't care how small or how big, I will go. I spent my time traveling this spring to various places, seeking membership and inviting people to join us in this beautiful journey that we're taking.
Janet.
Thank you. Yeah, just also I saw in the chat about somebody mentioning the Office for Theological Education and Stephen Spencer's work. And just to confirm that, as Jan has said, that yes, that, you know, we are in conversation about lots of these things. And Stephen Spencer is a very dear colleague of mine. I mentioned how we did a visit to South Sudan earlier in the year. Stephen Spencer attended that visit as well. And one of the things we did on that visit was we went to see a theological college in Kajukeji. We also went to see another sort of developing university in Juba. And he was very much that his wisdom and expertise was sort of called upon as well in some of those discussions, which was really valuable. And I think just recognizing that some of those places are not just providing ministry training, but also equipping lots of these young students in broader skills that are really needed in their society in terms of reconciliation skills and peace building and all of those kind of things. So, you know, it was really interesting to hear that sort of theological education kind of angle from Stephen in some of those really important contexts. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe give a last call for any last questions. Oh, here's a question. Does the society have any members from Mississippi? What I can do, Cliff, is I can look that up myself. And if you can actually send me a contact information, I can get you that answer directly. Unless
if we don't, we'd be happy to have you work with us to get one.
Absolutely.
Do they have your email address if they have any questions about the Compass Rose Society?
Yes, sir. I put it in the chat a little earlier. You can find my email address, compass.rose@diopapa.pa.org. Also, you can go to compassrosesociety.org, and I'll go ahead and put those in the chat one more time for everybody. We are, our annual general meeting, as Bishop Daniel said, is October 1st and 2nd. If you go to compassrowsociety.org, you'll find some more information about that. We will have a Zoom webinar situation very much like this that you can sign up to join. That will go live very soon with the link to join that. And there's still time to sign up if you would like to be in London. We'd love to see you there. And you can find all the information on the websites.
So just so you know, like we always have during the meeting, it's just not business. We have guest speakers. We've had Archbishop Hossam last year. This year we have Bishop Alvarado speaking about what is going on in Central America, about the problems of the church in Nicaragua that they're facing because of the repressive regime there. We have someone from Navajo land, along with Mayan Church in Guatemala, along with who else is on that panel?
Cornelia Eaton from Navajo land and Miguel Salonik from Guatemala.
And then we also have the head of Episcopal schools and talking about theological education at the primary level and just Episcopal and Anglican education. So we try to just offer a greater understanding and knowing so we can practice that presence. So it's going to be a great one, and Janet will be there, and members of the Archbishop staff, and it's a sacred, good, and joyful time.
Well, thank you, Julia, for that comment. I really appreciate all of you for joining. Thank you, panelists, for your time this afternoon and this evening, Janet. And I wish you all the best. Thank you, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Take care.